Helen entered her daughter's bedroom and sighed heavily again. It would seem that she had brought up the twins, Laura and Violet, the same way, but they grew up very different. And it was not about different interests or appearance, but in their attitude towards their mother and life. Laura was selfish, cunning, lazy. She studied poorly, quarrelled with everyone all the time, and always demanded something. Violet, on the contrary, was a shy, kind, polite and easygoing girl. She studied well and always helped her mother in everything. Laura did nothing but go out and have fun, putting her responsibilities on the shoulders of her good-natured sister. And now Helen caught the usual picture. Violet was sitting with a workbook and her surroundings were perfectly clean, but in Laura's part of the room there was chaos, and the girl was lying on her bed with headphones on, enthusiastically texting someone on the phone. Helen called out to Laura several times until she finally got away from the phone screen and looked at her mother in displeasure. "Laura, your tutor called and said you haven't shown up for class in a week. Aren't you ashamed? I paid a lot of money for them. How are you going to get into college?" "I don't want to enroll anywhere. I'm going to marry Paul and that's it," said Laura. Helen only shook her head reproachfully. Paul was Laura's boyfriend, studying to be a mechanic, and although she didn't approve their relationship, the daughter didn't care. "And how are you going to live? What are you going to do without an education?" once again asked the mother, but Laura only rudely brushed it aside. Eventually, after a few months, Violet enrolled in a prestigious university, began to receive a scholarship and moved into a dormitory. Helen was very proud of her daughter, but things were different with Laura. Immediately after school, she got married, as she had planned, and she didn't even invite her mother to the wedding. But the carefree life didn't work out. Paul didn't earn much. They lived in a tiny rented apartment in a troubled part of town. Soon, Paul started talking about exchanging his mother-in-law's apartment. It seemed unfair to him that a woman lived alone in a large apartment and also had a summer house. Paul thought that if Helen sold it all, she would be able to provide everyone with a decent place to live. He had been instilling these thoughts into Laura for so long that soon she began to think the same way. One day, she came to visit her mother, and over a cup of tea, she said that she had to help them buy their own place. Helen was shocked at such an offer and flatly refused. "Mum, do you really want your grandchildren to live in miserable conditions?" resented Laura. "I raised my 2 children alone, without a husband, so either provide a future for your children yourself or don't have them at all," replied Helen categorically. After this talk, Laura left, slamming the door loudly. But later, Helen felt sorry for her daughter and sold the apartment, giving both of her daughters a considerable sum of money from the proceeds. Laura gladly took the money, while Violet was persuaded by her mother for a long time. With the rest of the money, Helen bought herself a small studio on the outskirts of the city and lived there peacefully until Laura showed up on her doorstep again. This time her daughter was very gentle and even brought cookies for tea. The reason for this behaviour was revealed very soon. "Mum, we need your help. We wanted to take out a mortgage, but they won't give it to us because I work as a salesperson," and Paul was fired. He was unfairly accused of theft, and he couldn't prove that he was framed. "And how can I help you?" asked Helen suspiciously. "You must become our guarantor on the security of your apartment." Helen reminded her daughter that she had given her enough money. She gave the example of Violet, who had long ago taken out a mortgage, had studied and worked, and was somehow coping. But Laura had an answer for everything. "Violet has no personal life at all. You know Paul and I spent part of your gift on vacations, and we got a car. Of course there was still money left over for the first mortgage payment, but still without you it will not work. Please, Mom." Helen sighed, but no matter how much she felt pity for her daughter, she replied that she could do nothing more to help. "Well then, forget about me and don't ever show up in my life, okay?" shouted her daughter and rushed out of the apartment. Laura never spoke to her mother again since then. 15 years passed. Her daughter Violet and her family became the biggest joy in her life. After graduation, Violet got a job at a large advertising company, married a remarkable man, Thomas, and they had 2 sons. Violet and Thomas sold their apartments and bought a house in the suburbs of the capital. They often invited Helen to visit them. The grandchildren also often visited their grandmother. Helen's birthday was soon approaching, and she planned to celebrate it with her family. But the day before the celebration, Violet called and said that they couldn't come because of the busy work schedule. Helen was very upset because the last thing she wanted was to spend this day alone. She looked around the room and came across a baby picture of her daughters. The woman thought about Laura again. At first, after the quarrel, Helen wanted to reconcile with her, but she dropped her calls, and now Helen knew about her life only by pieces of information from mutual acquaintances. On the eve of her birthday, Helen dreamed that she was young again, and that both of her young daughters were with her. Waking up, she was determined to make one more attempt at reconciliation. The woman decided to invite Laura to her birthday in person. With difficulty, she climbed to the 5th floor of an old apartment building. She took a breath and pressed the doorbell. The door was opened by Paul. He looked shabby and sleepy, and Helen thought sadly that most likely he had never found a job. She said hello and asked to call her daughter. Paul gloomily looked at his mother-in-law from head to toe, answered that his wife was at work. "It's my birthday today," sighed the woman, "so I thought maybe you could come over tonight?" "I'll tell Laura that you stopped by, but I don't think she'll agree to go to you," replied Paul, lazily scratching his side and not even inviting his mother-in-law inside. "What time is she coming in from work? Can I wait for her? I'd like to talk to my daughter myself," asked Helen hopefully. "Laura will be late, and it's time for me to go too. All the best and happy birthday," said Paul indifferently, and slammed the door in front of his mother-in-law's nose. Helen went outside and cried. She didn't understand why she had been treated so badly, for she had always tried to be a good mother. She cried all the way home, and when she came home, her mood was not festive at all. She entered the apartment, turned on the light, and immediately she was surrounded by her relatives. The woman gasped in surprise, but then realized what was happening. The people had funny hats on their heads, bundles of colourful balloons in their hands. Violet was holding a bouquet of her mother's favourite flowers, pink peonies, and Thomas was holding a big, beautiful cake with burning candles. "Surprise!" shouted all of them amicably. "Happy birthday!" The grandchildren squealed with delight and rushed to hug their grandmother, and Helen cried again, but this time from happiness. She joyfully kissed her grandchildren, hugged her daughter and son-in-law, and they all sat down together at the holiday table, already set by her daughter. Thomas and Violet presented Helen with the long-awaited present of a coffee machine and a voucher to a sanatorium on the seashore. The evening passed remarkably well, but Helen's soul was still heavy. Feeling the love and care with which Violet looked at her, Helen could not stand it and told in details about her visit to Laura. "Mom, don't blame yourself. You did everything you could for Laura and more. I remember how you saved and denied yourself everything so that we could have everything we needed. And if Laura doesn't appreciate it, that's her choice. But you are the best mother ever." Helen looked into her daughter's eyes, and her heart squeezed. At that moment, she thought about the fact that she might not have many years ahead of her, and decided that the moment had come to reveal her secret and ease her soul. "Violet, I have something to tell you," she began softly. "Many years ago, I gave birth to a child. As I was lying in my ward, I heard the heartbreaking scream of a baby in the next room. When I looked in, all I saw was a little baby girl. I went over to her, took her in my arms, and she immediately calmed down. She was so tiny, miserable, and I cradled her in my arms and called the nurse to find her mother. And it turned out that she had run away. The baby was supposed to be sent to an orphanage." Violet listened to the story and felt cold inside. She already understood where it was leading to, but could not believe it. Then her mother said that she had visited the baby in the hospital for the rest of the time before she was discharged. She breastfed her because she had plenty of milk, and in the end she could not part with her, loving her as her own. And then she went to the head doctor and persuaded him to draw up documents as if she were born with twins, and to give the abandoned baby girl to her for upbringing. She was literally lying on her feet in the head doctor's office, begging him to help, and in the end he agreed. Helen looked at Violet with eyes full of tears. "And all my life I asked myself the only question, how is it possible that my own daughter Laura does not want to know me? And you are always by my side, both in sorrow and in joy." The woman took a breath and wiped away her tears. "Forgive me for telling you all this now, but I want you to know that I have no one more dear and closer than you. The first time I saw you, I knew at once that you were my little girl." Violet also cried. She held her elderly mother close to her, kissed her grey hair, and whispered, "Mommy, I didn't even think I could love you more. But it turns out it's possible," she said sincerely. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Thank you for saving me without fear of hardship. I love you so much." At that moment, the youngest grandson ran into the room and, seeing the two crying women, looked at them with wide-open eyes and called out to his father. "Daddy, Daddy, why are they crying?" the little boy asked in surprise. "A birthday is sometimes a sad holiday," said Thomas thoughtfully, stroking his son's head. "That's because you didn't listen to me," declared the child. "You should have bought sweets for Grandma, not that stuff you presented. Then she wouldn't have cried for sure." The women looked at each other and laughed. Through her tears, Helen looked at her family and decided that now she would cry only for happiness and to appreciate those around her.